So let's be honest, the news that we look at lately, particularly, it does feel like the world is unraveling. We see wildfires blazing in Los Angeles, new viruses are emerging, we see political tensions flaring up continually, and if you look at social media, it very often seems people are at each other's throats. Tomorrow, we'll have the inauguration of a new president who is being greeted with joy by many and others with dread. And it's very polarized. And with the grim headlines, it's easy to think that we are just in a complete downward spiral. Things are only getting worse and worse and worse. So I'm going to be talking about that topic today. And I'm going to make what seems to be a very controversial statement these days. I'm optimistic about our future. Now, I know some of you are thinking to yourselves as I say that, because you've told me this when I've mentioned it in other discussions. Are you living under a rock? Haven't you watched the news lately? And truthfully, there's times when I doubt things are moving in the right direction, but I remain optimistic about our future, both for humanity and the church, and I'm going to explain why. First, I look at history and I realize that the idea that this is the worst possible time in the history of the world is not unique to today. People have been saying that throughout all of history. If you go back to the first century BC, Cicero lamented that Rome was at its worst moment and the world was in its worst shape. In the medieval chronicle times, the 14th century, the Black Plague and the Hundred Years' War convinced thinkers of the time, and they wrote about it, that the world was on the brink of an apocalypse. This was the end. And in the last century, we had two world wars where we witnessed the horrors of trench warfare and then the horrors of the Holocaust and then the atomic bomb. And many believed civilization was hitting a rock bottom. And then during the Cold War, we had the fear of nuclear annihilation, and it led many to think this was the end. If you grew up during that period, you might have done drills of crawling under your desk for a nuclear attack. And so today we have similar fears. We've got concerns around climate change, a pandemic that we just went through, but knowing that others could pop up at any time. We've got serious wars and conflicts. There's a lot going on, a lot of negative stuff going on. But I think if we look back and we look at the bigger picture and the long-term data on poverty, literacy, and life expectancy, you'd see some incredible improvements over the centuries. Just some quick examples to give us comparison of how great this time is that we're living in many ways. And that is that the average life expectancy worldwide has soared from just 30 to 40 years in 1900 to about 70 today. So that's almost doubling from 1900. Medical breakthroughs, antibiotics, vaccines, improved surgical techniques have dramatically reduced infectious diseases. We've seen a historic shift economically around the world, where the number of people living in extreme poverty went from 80% in 1820 to below 10% in the 2010s. That's a dramatic shift. We have better public health. Child mortality rates have plummeted due to widespread immunizations, clean water access, and maternal health programs. We've also seen an increase in literacy and education. Global adult literacy rates have climbed from 30% in 1900 to 87% in recent years. On the civil rights fronts, we see a lot of advances. Women's rights, in our own country, but around the world, we're seeing that people are recognizing women's suffrage, property rights, and greater equality in education and the workforce. Civil rights, worldwide, activists have fought for racial equality and made gains. The gay and lesbian community has made dramatic gains. And we're seeing shifts in cultural norms toward inclusivity. And though we are witnessing a rise in military tensions around the world, we've experienced a decline in large-scale wars since World War II. The digital revolution that allows us to be speaking today from many different locations has connected billions of people, providing unprecedented access to education. And we would think that the environment would be an example of how bad things have gotten, but there have been a lot of progress on climate change globally that we're even aware of it and dealing with it. And conservation efforts are on the rise. So while it remains a big challenge, there's been a lot of progress. So these are just statistics. I could go on and on. But I think one reason we can't appreciate the good news of our moment is that we're in a news cycle now that focuses on crises. And I think that our faith invites us to a bigger picture, and we can look at God's ongoing work beneath the surface to see something improving. So, in the Swedenborgian perspective, this is one area that is very different from a lot of traditional Christian churches, in that the book of Revelations at the very end, and we read a lot of it today, and thank you, Ross, for reading it. It has apocryphal language. It's written in language that is not, it's not literal, but it's often interpreted as a doomsday text, meaning that Revelations is the end of the world. But in our tradition, the book of Revelations was a prediction of spiritual evolution and collective transformation. It argues in our tradition that God is continually nudging humanity toward greater goodness and truth. Even though that will lead to chaos at times, justice grows. So I've noticed some of the historic trends that I believe have moved in the positive direction, and there's certainly within those um, bad times too. So why is that? I think partly because we tend to look at progress as a straight line going up, and when things don't go well, we think, "Oh gosh, this is we're things are going backward." But in fact, I think history moves more in cycles. There are periods of growth, there are periods of decline, there are periods where societies rise, they stagnate, they reawaken. There are ups and downs, and that parallels our own lives too. Hopefully, in our own spiritual lives, we're growing spiritually, but that doesn't mean there are periods when we feel very distant from God, distant from love, could be very lonely and disconnected, and other periods where we grow closer and closer. So I believe these cycles and the song we had today, the circle of life, I think that circle of life is continually moving in a positive direction, including uh, good times and tough times. Another factor that has helped me, informs me at least, in thinking things are better are predictions that Swedenborg made about when he read Revelations. And he described four areas that would dramatically change in the world. And he was writing in the 1700s. And the first one is that he made a prediction that the Christian church, as it was in Europe at that time, particularly, would need to die for something new to grow. And he looks at that passage we read about the seven angels and the last plagues. And what he predicted was that there would be a downfall of rigid religion, structures their faith based solely on fear, judgment, and exclusion, rather than love and wisdom. And if we look today, that's been happening. We consider the scandals and a large numbers of people leaving traditional churches. And that's unsettling. It's unsettling for a pastor who's trying to create a congregation, right? That's not good news. But the case is made that this is clearing the way for new forms of spiritual expression that will emphasize inclusion and justice. So the old dies so the new can be born. The second prediction that he had from the book of Revelations was when he talked about the 12 gates in the holy city. And he interpreted that to say that there will be a new period where there will be diverse paths to the divine. And that, of course, has happened dramatically. If you think about it in his time, if you were the wrong type of Christian, you could be burned at the stake. But today we're much more religiously pluralistic. And if you look at younger generations, they often are embracing a variety of traditions, and they're seeing that they hold the same core truths. So interfaith gatherings are very common now, and they're common within our Holy City community. We've hosted Christian Muslim dialogue, we've hosted Jewish speakers, Buddhist speakers, and secular humanists, all different viewpoints. And I believe that openness to the various paths that people are finding reflects that this idea that the Holy City has many gates, there are many ways, and that's a new understanding. Traditionally, religion's always said if you don't follow our path, you're going to hell. So that's new, and I think that's positive. Another new prediction that he said would be there would be a growth in the era of equality, and he based that on the text where it says that the city will be laid out like a square as long as it is wide. And he said that describes a perfect square stands for justice and equality. So he said that over the next centuries you'll see a dramatic shift on justice issues. And we have. Shortly after he wrote all this, we see the rise of democracy, an expansion of civil rights, an end of the slave trade, new movements for women and the LGBT community. So these are far from perfect, but I think we have to keep in mind that Dr. King, whose birthday we celebrate tomorrow, reminded us about the importance of this optimism around justice when he said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. So each new policy change, each new conversation, it can bring us closer to equality. The fourth prediction that he made, he took from that passage in Revelation that says that there is no temple in the holy city. And he said that that means there will be an end of religious exclusivity. It will see a rise of people who are spiritual but not religious. And it's less important about one institution. It's more about finding God in everyday life, whatever faith path that is, but it also could be through nature, service, meditation, or art. No single group can corner the market on the divine because the Spirit's everywhere. So those are four predictions that he made at that time. The fact that I believe I'm witnessing them, I'm experiencing them, and he warned at the time they would be very disruptive. But that's how spiritual renewal takes place. It still leaves us a little uncomfortable when we see very negative events, and we wonder, can they be of good use? And he had a quote, which has always given me comfort. I don't know if it will for you, but I'll share it. He said, before anything is brought back into order, it's quite normal for to first be brought into confusion and virtual chaos. So for there to be new things to come into the world, there has to be a deconstruction and a period too. So this suggests that for something to be brought into its proper place and function, it must be broken down, sometimes disordered, and it allows for the separation of elements to create something new in a new, better way. Now, both in our own life and in the life of the world, when we experience these periods of spiritual growth, they can be unsettling, but they can awaken us spiritually when we see a crisis. Controversies that we see expose hidden injustice, and they can spark conversations, and we can take on our moral responsibilities. If you think about it, we really didn't know much about what was going on behind the scenes. And now that we do, it can be disappointing, but it's actually more honest. We also see a great deal of polarization we're experiencing, particularly around our political life. And I believe this also can prompt deeper reflection for us. We can say, who is my neighbor? And how can I care for others in spite of who they voted for and get beyond that desire to be us versus them and demonize people we disagree with? I think that the tension that we experience in the world can help us to rally for the common good. And I think we can see that in grassroots work, volunteering, civic engagement during challenging times. In our tradition, that's called uses. How can we uniquely use our gifts to better society? And we are called to do that. When times get rough, we can discover those gifts, often for the first time and sometimes anew. So you might wonder, okay, you're still thinking as people always push back on me on this, have you seen social media lately? And do you know what's going on? And so I am not someone who is isolated from what's going on. So this is not Pollyanna. I know I read it, and it's precisely at times when things look grim that I believe faith-based optimism is a radical stance, but a critically important one. I love this quote by Helen Keller, who, inspired by Swedenborg, said, "My optimism does not rest on the absence of evil, but on a glad belief in the preponderance of good and a willing effort to cooperate with the good that it may prevail." Far from ignoring suffering, instead we face it with compassion and action, trusting that goodness ultimately outweighs evil. I recall during many crises, but I think about the pandemic. And yes, we remember it now for the fear and division, but I also remember the health workers, the scientists, neighbors, our own community. I saw remarkable courage and solidarity in the midst of a crisis. The crisis certainly heightened inequities, but it revealed our capacity to come together. And I see that happening again and again, and I think it's happening now. Revelations ends with a really beautiful vision of God living among us in that one passage that says God is now dwelling among his people. And I believe that is happening. I'm optimistic, not just because life is smooth, but because we're headed towards something very good, a new spiritual age. And we can each play a part in getting there. We do that, we can play our role when we choose to cooperate with God's love rather than resist it in our own life. We can choose daily acts of kindness, empathy, and justice. That may sound cliche, but that's how the world improves. We can refuse to give in to fear, because fear and pessimism will get us stuck and it will take away our agency, and we'll lose our ability to be of help to others because we can get consumed by it. And a lot of what the social media is doing, and a lot of the polarization that's going on, and a lot of the doom scrolling, the so-called doom scrolling, is all an effort to make us less engaged and apathetic. So we have to resist that. We are called to make things better, and we have to do that by practicing love, compassion, and inclusion. Jesus in Luke 17 said, "The kingdom of God is within you." And I see that to believe that the kingdom unfolds each time we choose hope over despair, and each time we choose empathy over selfishness. Now, some will resist, but overall, I do believe that the course of history is bending toward a new, more enlightened era. And we will get there faster if we can open our hearts to God's presence. And we can't let pessimism take away our agency to do good. It's interesting that the ancestors of this spiritual community chose the name the Washington Society of the New Jerusalem. They were picking up directly from that Book of Revelations passage that there was something new happening in the world, and they organized to be part of it. They later changed their name to Church of the Holy City, and that again is focusing on that spiritual story in Revelations that is optimistic about God's goodness being brought into the world. So this week, let's practice optimism. Look for the seeds of the Holy City in your workplace, your neighborhood, and your personal life. Notice the small acts of kindness and celebrate them. God is doing something new in our world, and we're invited to play our part in it. Amen. At this time, we will open up to questions or comments. And I want to welcome Steve and Skylar and Matthias and Annabelle, Natalia, Barb. I think everybody else I said hi to earlier, so it's good to see everybody. So any thoughts on that? I will say that of the topics that I talk about, this is the one I get the most pushback on. People really do not like that when I say things are getting better. So please raise your questions and comments. Natalia?
Hello, everyone. Hi, Rich. Thank
Hello.
you for thank you for your sermon. I do agree with you as far as a situation is for today. Basically, you made a great bottom line, but I believe this bottom line ends today, and nobody knows what the world we will enter, let's say on Tuesday. And I understand that probably majority of people somehow will survive, but I'm concerned about most vulnerable people because they are going to be thrown under bus. And my question is there a specific plan for the church how to help those who will be thrown under the bus?
Yeah, no, I don't have a particular plan for what we will do because I don't know what's going to happen yet. Um, and so, but I think that it will be an opportunity if people, when we see a need to respond. And I think that, yeah, so I don't have I don't have a blueprint for exactly because I don't know exactly what's going to happen. And yeah, so that would be it. I think we will have to see what happens and respond. And I think as people feel moved within the congregation, say like, this is an area I'm really concerned about, we should talk about that and have leaders within the community take the leadership role on maybe different issues that come up. So, but
Okay.
thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
question.
you. Thank you.
Ross?
Yeah, thank you. I was not expecting to say this because I've not been a fan of Trump, but I think he deserves credit for two important things. One is just bringing the ceremonies indoors for the safety of the people, and the other is working closely to make the Gaza ceasefire come into existence. The reporting is that Trump's Middle East diplomat told Netanyahu in no uncertain terms, "You have got to accept this deal." That doesn't mean we're out of the woods, but I think that one of the reasons the deal was so hard to get was Netanyahu was betting that Trump would go in a different direction, and thank goodness he did the right thing.
Yeah, Ross, and I would also say that whatever we think about politics, some people might be, very excited about the new president. Some people are very horrified by the new president and what they'll do. But I think one of the things to avoid is jumping to conclusions about, I know this is how it's going to play out, and it's going to, and sort of worrying about a future thing that has not happened, because there could be other ramifications to it, and we just don't know. So I think we need to be aware, but not necessarily, there could be unexpected results. That's generally how things happen. Mateus says, I'm on a train right now. Thank you for your sermon. Here's my question. Do you think we are going through a period of deconstruction and chaos right now in the cycle of progress? And given how bad such cyclical downturns have been to you mentioned World War II and the Cold War, do you think we should be facing issues of that scale? Um, yeah, in my own humble opinion, I've no, again, I guess everything I say is my opinion. I have no idea, right? I do think we're in a period of major shakeup of things. I think we are coming into a different period. And and how bad will it get or how good will it get? I don't know. I think there could be one thing is I will just say there's a tendency to kind of look at it in a binary way and say like everything that we're going to a shakeup, therefore everything's going to be bad. But I kind of piggybacking on Ross's example, you don't know the outcomes of things, and you think you do, and you've kind of got it, and we kind of think we've got it figured out. And so I think we have to be open to applauding good things that come in this period that we're coming into. We've been in it. We're not coming into it just because of a change of president. We've been in a period of um, the country has been in a period where incumbents have been kicked out pretty consistently for a period here, regardless of what party. So people are very unhappy. So I don't know. I don't know what that cycle, what that downturn will be. I and I don't let myself really go that far into it personally. What I do is I say, okay, right now we are Church of the Holy City, and we're in also in Washington, and we have a nationwide group. Um, what role can we play depending on what comes up? That's kind of like what is our role? Everything for me comes back to what can we do, and not lamenting the situation. So I don't know exactly, but that's a great question, Matthias. But I do feel like we're in a period of that period of chaos when things are being put back together in a way and being seen. I mean, one of the things that it reminds me of is that for your generation, Matthias, I think that it's very hard to look at an adult leader that you really respect. I hear this a lot from younger people who doesn't have a sex scandal, right? Who hasn't done something horrible in their personal life, isn't stealing. I mean, and I'm talking about pastors, I'm talking about politicians like Hollywood celebrities. But one of the things that to keep in mind is we've never known their lives before. They've been well hidden from us for many, many generations. And we thought that people were something. So we're kind of seeing things very unfiltered in a way. And I actually think that's a healthy thing, though it can be like, wow, everybody's kind of um, got a dark side. Well, they do. And we're actually seeing it more. So that would be another example where um, I think we're in that period, which will be good in the long run, but could be bumpy in the process. Malcolm,
Yeah,
Tarina?
Ross had mentioned the Middle East, and of course, as you know, my focus is often on that area. In the last few days, I've been in touch with an old Iranian friend. He was a member of a group of filmmakers for whom I arranged a State Department sponsored visit 17 or 18 years ago. And he and I have been challenging each other in the last few days as to whether, on balance, we can be optimistic about the Middle East. And I think we've come out on the positive side. After his visit here, he spent a year in Evin prison, but since then he has reestablished himself as a prominent filmmaker dealing with important issues in Iran. So he himself is an example of possible positive movement in the Middle East. And I think he and I agree that this is a time of movement like the time after the October War of 1973, which led to Camp David and the 1979 peace treaty. So there is at least the possibility of movement forward, which has not existed for some time. So I think we can be at least guardedly optimistic.
And what I appreciate about you, one, you have this great knowledge of it, but I think that the important thing in this is true in our personal lives too, when we see a crisis, is can we look for the good? Like, can we look for the good and seize it? Like, what good could come from this? Instead of getting into a binary, particularly a depressed binary that says everything is a disaster and then as it unfolds as a disaster because we're not engaged, it reinforces it for us. See, it just proves how terrible it is. So I think we can seize upon good news and be realistic about bad news too. So I appreciate that, Malcolm, from your perspective of many, many years as a scholar. That's um, probably more optimistic than I would be. So I'm glad to hear it. That's excellent. Anybody else? Katerina.
As I understand it, under the Swedenborgian tradition, the onus of responsibility for creating this heaven on earth is on us, sort of the fallible humans that we are. And my first question is, where does God fit into that? What is his role in helping us as his agents of change in making that happen? Question two is, can that heaven ever be perfect if we are the ones trying to help create and evolve to that? Or will it always be fallible in some sense?
Okay, two heavy duty questions that would be a whole theological course in themselves. So Let's go back to the first one, and you probably have to remind me of the second one after I forget it. But the first one is about yes, God does not, in our theology, God doesn't act directly in the world, but through humanity. And so human beings have a huge, important role. And what that you were saying, so what's God's role? Every good that comes out of us is God. Every good thought, every good action, all that is by the grace of God. We might think we're good people. It's by the grace of God. So God is constantly pouring love into us and through us and giving us ideas of what could be better and what we could do better in our life and introducing us to people that can help us be better. Like it's constant. We do tend to resist it, and we do tend to go with our selfish path and the path that we think is best, and we know the right thing and we have all the answers. So when we do that, when we say I've got all the answers, I don't need any help, I'm a good person, I'll do it my way, that is resistance to this flow. And so I think when you really get a really spiritual person, it's like God flows through them, and you can kind of experience that when you're with them. They're generally very calm, and their ego is not tied up in getting credit or status, but they're just like, I am literally a vehicle, a vessel. And it's very humbling because we want to think, oh, I did this great thing and I've done all these great things and that. And in this worldview, it would be that we are vehicles, vessels of God's work in the world. And so in a way, one of the analogies would be like the sun is always shining. That's God's love, and we block it. So it's much more that God is very active and we can passively block it. So that would be the question of God's engagement. And it's just literally being open to it, and it will work through you. And that will also require us to deal with our own demons, our own shadow. They will come up. We all have it. We all have things we need to change. That's why we do the confession. And we have to become aware of that and say, I need to change that, and I'm going to do it. And that moves us to another level. So that's one. God's very involved in directly through us, but through us. And that's our role in life, is to, as spiritual agents, to be open to that, not resist. The second question is more about, I don't know if I completely understood it, but it was like, if everybody did good, would there be no more evil in the world? Is that what you're getting at? Or would heaven?
No, it's like heaven, will it be a fallable version of heaven? Because it's us fallible humans trying to make it happen.
Yeah, there is a vision of of heaven on earth. Like, so when we pray in the Lord's Prayer, as it is in heaven, we're asking for heaven on earth. Uh, I don't see that anytime in the near future, but to the degree that we let God's love into the world through ourselves and our actions and our activities, and we're open to that, the world gets better. And I think that's my argument today, is I think it's gotten better for humanity, in cycles. And but so that would be the vision. That's essentially the vision of the New Jerusalem, is that the world becomes almost heavenly, where you do have love, and you and the need for example, for war, greed, these things. Uh, that would be the vision, heaven on earth. If that answers your question, does it?
Thank you. Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. Glenn, and then David.
I was very much encouraged by your message today. I was raised in a United Methodist household. My father was a United Methodist pastor and a very conservative-minded person. And there was a tradition about the second coming of Christ as something that was, in my mind, terrifying, and something that basically you had to guard against or be ready for. But 45 years ago, I married into the Swedenborgian Church. My wife, Dory, my sister-in-law, Chris Leitner, and so many good friends and clergy. The thing that attracted me most to the Swedenborgian Church was the thought that the second coming of Christ had already occurred, and that it was God's word being revealed, and that it was having a positive effect. And it was a positive message that was a salve to my own heart. So that was 45 years ago. I'm still learning a bit as we go along, but that's why I'm here basically. What you had to say today was in keeping with something that I was very much attracted to, something that I thought was very odd, but I do believe is true. So let's keep looking at the tops of the waves as being the direction that we want to strive for, and something I believe that God is helping us attain.
Well, thank you for sharing that lovely story, Glenn. That's beautiful. I didn't know your background. I know you're also a pastor, so that was really interesting. And I will say, Glenn, I was raised in the Baptist church, and it was the second coming of Christ was really beat over us as a scare
Yeah,
tactic.
yeah,
We watched, I don't know if you saw this movie called A Thief in the Night, but
yeah.
at youth retreats, we'd see a movie, A Thief in the Night, and it would be like a guy is shaving at the sink in the bathroom, and then the razor's on the sink. And his wife comes in and says, "Hey, he's been raptured." And then cars are crashing and people are disappearing. And then, so anyway, it's a horror movie. It's a very scary thing to show kids. And then that's what they showed us. And at the end, they said, "Is there anybody here who hasn't accepted Jesus Christ? Because if you haven't, you'll be left behind." And we even sang a song that with the refrain was, "And I've been left behind." Like we'd go, "I did this and I did this and this, and I've been left behind." So Revelations was used as I felt a very manipulative tool on young people to scare us. So people, of course, stood up and said, "Yes, I don't want to be left behind. I'm 15 years old. What do I got to do? Get baptized? Whatever." That also creates I would say it's not just not a healthy Christian because you're not, God is love. It's not, God is not about fear and punishment and retribution. God is love. So that was my big question with my dad as he would drive me to soccer games. I like, this makes no sense. This was manipulative. I am not going to be manipulated into believing in a loving God. And that's when my dad said, "You're gonna have to read your grandfather's books." And that's where I started
Hmm.
reading it. Yeah. So very similar. But I do remember that movie, The Thief in the Night, about being left behind. Very scary stuff. So thank you
Yeah.
for reminding me of that, the trauma of that interpretation. Thank you, Glenn. David, you have your hand up. David, you're on mute.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I agree with your sermon about, compare how we live now, say, with how things were years ago. Say, our readings with Luke and John, 2000. If you would take a guy from that age and bring him in today's world, especially where I'm in the winter right now, I'm sitting in a nice heated house with food around the light. They would look at that and they go, "Well," they think they died and went to heaven. Here they look and say, your problem is what? What are you complaining about? You know, uh, it, uh, a while ago, we were discussing with a friend about medical advancements, and like up until about 150 years ago, medicine wasn't really able to keep anybody out of pain. Until they developed morphine and all that, especially dental. And this is an interesting statistic. Um, Even in the early 1817, dental problems was about the fourth leading cause of death for people. Because when your teeth went bad or tooth and it absent, they couldn't do anything for you. When's the last time anybody here has seen somebody die of dental problem? Never. We have vaccines, polio, the scarlet fever, all those things. But then the things about politics, I mean, Jesus said that, that stuff will always be there, the next day. But, why let it bother you? It's there. I mean, that's to be optimistic in a bad mood. Oh, that's not from Jesus. That's from a bad spirit that's tormenting a person. They're pecking at your brain to make you miserable. You don't put up with that. Just swat that thing aside. You tell them, get away from me. But uh, boy, where I live here, there was a big American Indian presence, And during the winter, they always called it the time of sorrow because a large percent of their population would die because of starvation or they would freeze to death. And that's just unthinkable. Like weather right now, could you imagine going outside trying to live? You couldn't survive it. But for us, things are a lot better, and everybody's doing well here. There's no reason to be upset or angry or the president. That comes and goes. But I always like the one song. You were growing up in the Baptist church. Right? Do you remember this song? Count your blessings, name them one by one.
Mm-hmm.
Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what the Lord has done. I mean, people, sing that song to yourself a little bit. Think about something good for a change. Put good stuff in your brain. Don't all the nasty stuff. Why stick it in there? That's not for us. Are we a member of the Church of the Holy City or the Church of Perpetual Misery or something? You don't want to be miserable. We're supposed to be happy. We're one day closer to heaven.
Amen, Pastor David. I completely
Oh,
agree. And also, I will just say about you, David, like we don't know each other well in person, but obviously through church.
oh,
You're,
we've met a few
we
times.
do. I'm saying we haven't, but I'm just saying your positivity at church on Sundays through the years has been so common, and particularly when people have shared tough things, you've always had a positive comment for them. And I think that optimism and that positivity allows you the space to be there for others. And if you're in a rabbit hole, if you're being pulled down, if it's constantly negativity, then it's very hard for you to be in that space that you provide, David. So I want to thank you
Uh,
for always being a positive presence. And it's what people need to hear very often. And I think
well,
that's
well,
a
like
role.
being a member of the church, like everybody here, we're brothers and sisters, and we help each other out, like we're a family. You help somebody has a problem, you jump in and help them out.
Yes, it's very noticeable. It's very appreciated.
That very nice comment. I appreciate that.
Any other questions or comments, concerns? Okay. Well, good discussion. Um, let's continue to be optimistic and find out what our role is as individuals and as a community.